Kia ora, welcome to Face to Face. This time we have with us Shamubeel Yaacob. Welcome along, Shamubeel.
Thanks, Jeff.
And Shamubeel's come along to talk to us this week about the implications of Brexit. So, of course, we've all seen the results of the vote. Britain is leaving the EU, and what really does that mean for us here in New Zealand?
Yeah, I guess, Brexit was a surprise to me, I got to admit. I didn't expect this would happen. And part of that was because we know the economic consequences of this is going to be quite negative for the UK. And when I thought deeper about it and read the million postmortems, I think the thing that came through most is that the UK is now a divided kingdom. And it's the deep divisions in society that is probably the most important message to come out of Brexit.
So all the stuff about, the headquarters of banks are going to have to shift to Europe, and there'll be job losses, share price falls, drops in the pound, all that sort of stuff really affecting the city of London, although, there are some other areas that are affected, but mostly the city of London. So you think the rest of the country is just going, whatever, basically?
Well, I think it's more than that. I think it's the, sort of decades of pent-up frustration and almost this sense of hopelessness that they have experienced in these deindustrialized places. And the geography of the vote was really interesting in terms of the City of London, and those fairly well-to-do places voted to stay. Pretty much everybody else said, we want to get out.
Yeah.
And it was almost a vote to say, look, we need some representation. And the politics and the media was, in some ways, I think the urbanites and the elites who were speaking for themselves rather than for everybody. And the challenge for me is that I think what we had with the promise of globalization was that it's going to be good for everybody eventually. And we didn't really talk about the short-term costs, because with the same time as we opened up our economies, we made our welfare systems meaner, more grudging, and more difficult. And we've kind of created these poverty traps. And the people who are disaffected now are the majority rather than the minority.
Yeah, so when I worked in the UK, I was actually one of my jobs was up in the former coal belt of North Nottinghamshire, and yeah, see exactly what you were talking about. Yeah. These former coal mining communities, everyone had a job, it was guaranteed, you didn't have to go to university to get a job.
Good pay.
Good pay. And little downside that you die of lung cancer aged 60, but that's minor in the scheme of things. They were proud of their coal industry and the culture that created, and that's all gone.
And it was the same with manufacturing as well, right?
Yeah.
The UK had a very proud tradition of manufacturing as well as coal, which the coal was driving. And I think we see the same kind of parallels in New Zealand. I talk about zombie towns, the divided New Zealand, the us versus them that's opening up. And almost this hollowing out of previously affluent communities that's leaving in its wake this large numbers of disaffected people. Speaks to a broader issue of equity. What is it that we want? And for me, Brexit was that kind of the most concrete version of what we're seeing in terms of the rise of people like Trump and Sanders in the US, what we're seeing in terms of almost a hung parliament in Australia, Pauline Hanson becoming more popular again. You got people who are totally bigoted and racist, and yet they're finding that they're representing a vein of anger.
And so, do you think we're just a few years behind here in New Zealand, or is everything hunky-dory here?
Well, I don't think it's hunky-dory, right? I think the divisions are across our regions, just like it was in the UK, young versus the old. What's happening with the housing market today is a source of massive inequity. Generation rent being pitted against the boomers who own lots of investment properties, or seemingly own lots of investment properties. My fear is that, if we go down this path of division, this polarized bits of community, how do we get to a position where we start to solve these things? Because ultimately the solutions are going to be driven by politics. It's going to be public policy solutions. But if we have very divided, sort of almost battle lines, and we're always going to be trying to vie for position in our own ideologies, it's not going to work.
Difficult balance though, because we need to have the debate. We've got these issues we need to discuss, but without turning it into, the media likes battle lines to have a debate, right? So, how do we have this conversation without creating a war between these groups?
Yeah, I think we've spent a lot of time defining the problems. I think the battle line should be around what kind of solutions we're willing to pursue and what we're willing to give up. Because with any solution, there are costs, right?
Yeah.
And at the moment, it feels like we're not quite sure what is it that we value. What does New Zealand actually stand for? We kind of tell ourselves these stories about how equitable we are, how egalitarian we are. I don't know if that's entirely true, because the experience is we're not. And somehow we have to rediscover whether we're starting from the same common values. So then that's not the basis of the conversation, but rather the substance of the actions of the policies that we might be pursuing.
Yeah, well, I think the homelessness thing has kind of shown that we're not the equitable nation we once thought we were. I mean, the young girl who was trying to get into St Kentigern's was studying in the back of a car. I mean, no one can say that she had a fair go, as it was a equality of opportunity.
That stuff was heartbreaking. It really was. But at the same time, it's also other things, like the stuff that came out recently from Victoria University that showed that you're far more likely to be prosecuted for welfare fraud than general fraud.
Yeah.
White collar crime is kind of okay. That's not good enough. The criminal system, the justice system should be impartial to all of these kinds of things. Criminality should be punished with the right kinds of ways, and we should try and reintegrate people the best that we can. And I think it's that, the broader issue that, the movement that we're seeing in terms of academia, economics, public policy, away from the fundamentals of neoliberalism that really took over the world, the Western world in the 70s and 80s, which was all about individualism, right? The politics of me rather than the politics of we or us. And there's a little bit of that we need to have the conversation in New Zealand. I think we're quite far behind still.
So is this about going back to the 70s, do you think? I mean, should we...
God, I hope not.
Bring back Muldoons, we can all wear shorts and long socks again?
Jesus, that was hideous, wasn't it? We should never allow that to happen again. Well, we can't have rose-tinted glasses, but I think there was something about New Zealand post-war that had some really good principles behind it. It was about nation building, it was about equity, and we were making investments for the future. There was this optimistic nature of progress. And I always use state housing and home ownership as two examples of things that we made really good inroads in the post-war period, pretty much until 1991, when both home ownership rate and number of state houses increased. Since then, they've both been falling, and now we're at the lowest level relative to population since the late 40s or late 50s. We've given back a lot of progress. And I think we have to admit that not everything of the reforms of the 80s were good. There were aspects that were absolutely necessary, but not everything was good. We don't want to go back and reinvent history. But what I want us to do is get that sense of aspiration, the sense of nation building, and the sense of progress that we want to create, not just for ourselves, but for future generations. And it's that ability to just think forward, a little bit less selfish. I think we can do this. It's just, we're not aware of the pain that's there in New Zealand right now.
So, one last question, Shamabeel. One thing, you can do one thing tomorrow. What's it going to be?
I would like young people to vote, because I think young people get it, but they're so disaffected and disconnected that their voice is not being heard.
And really difficult with the Brexit, and that what we're seeing in England now is because the young people got outvoted by the elderly, they're actually turning their backs on voting even more. Yeah.
But I think the lesson for us should be Brexit would have gone the other way if young people had voted.
There you go. That's something for you at home if there's anyone young out there watching. Thank you very much, Shamabeel Jacob.